Welcome back to the latest episode of Slightly Tofu, 有点豆腐. This is Q, and joining me today, as always, is my co-host, Jojo. And for those of you tuning in for the first time, Slightly Tofu is probably the only vegan podcast in mainland China. This is a podcast where we talk about veganism, animal rights, abolitionism, and mix it all with social commentary. For today's episode, we're starting something new. In fact, I think it's the beginning of a new series. Whether we have that commitment or not, I guess we'll find out. So in this series, we will be talking with international guests, and the conversations will be in English. But to make things easier for everyone, we'll have both Chinese and English transcriptions available on our website. Our guest today is Oscar Horta. He's a Spanish animal ethicist and co-founder of animalethics.org. He has been a committed vegan for decades and is perhaps best known for his works on a topic that many people, even within the animal movement, find deeply challenging, the ethics of wild animal suffering. Oscar has just spent almost half a month in China on a very intense trip, giving lectures on animal ethics, meeting with students and advocates, and debating issues like speciesism and wild animal suffering with Chinese scholars. So today we'll hear about his experiences in China, and along the way, we will explore some of the bigger questions he's been working on. Oscar, before we dive into your China trip, let's start on a personal note. What first brought you into veganism and animal ethics? And maybe if you still recall, do you remember your first meaningful interaction with a non-human animal?
Okay, so the thing is, when I was a kid, I remember that, I grew up in a place by the sea. And I remember it was very usual for people to go fishing there. And when I was like very, very young, I don't know how old I was going fishing crustaceans. There are lots of like shrimps and animals like crabs and so on. And I remember how after going there, I saw one day how they were cooking them, and they boil them alive. It's horrible, and you can hear the sound of the animals like da 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 da, wanting to get free. And that was like something horrible. I was horrified about that. And I said, I'm never going to go fishing again. Well, not fishing because I never like fished fishes. I only fished these animals. But I said, I'll never do this again. And I don't want to ever eat these animals again. But, I was very young and I never made the connection. Also, where I lived, we didn't eat like rabbits, but once my parents told us, yeah, we're going to be eating rabbit. And I was like, what the hell? I'm not eating a rabbit. No way I'm eating a rabbit. I mean, rabbits are cool. But again, I didn't make the connection, right, with that. So, yeah, life went on. And then when I was like much older, when I was a teenager, I was involved in like social issues. I wanted the world to be a better place and a fairer place for everyone. And some of my friends were into not eating animals out of concern for them. And at the beginning, I tried to resist that because I liked eating animals. But at some point, I found out that I didn't have any arguments against that. So eventually I thought, well, I guess I won't have the willpower to go vegan I wasn't thinking of going vegan then because I didn't know anyone who was vegan, really. I just thought about not eating animals. So I thought I won't have the willpower to do this, but I'll try to reduce the number of animals that I eat. So maybe I won't eat animals when I need to prepare my own meals, but when other people prepare them, I'll eat them. And I did that. And then I was, well, if I go out and need to order food, I will only order food without animals. So it was like a gradual thing. And eventually, after a couple of months or something like that, I found out that I was not eating animals. So I thought, well, I'll give it a try. Let's see for how long did I last without eating animals. And it lasted for a long time. This was probably, I don't know, maybe 93 or something like that. And then the year afterwards, I had learned more about veganism and I decided to go vegan. But where I lived, I didn't know anyone who was vegan, really. So yeah, it was pretty much something that I did in a very exploratory way. And then afterwards, once I was vegan already, I learned about speciesism. And that's what really changed my mind. Because the concept and the whole, idea behind it, that this is a very bad thing. This is a discrimination that is terrible. And it's harming more individuals than any injustice against humans is harming. So that's when I decided, okay, this is the most important thing that I can do with my life, which is to defend animals. And that's what I've been trying to do ever since.
I wonder, when you were the only vegan that you know, especially like back in the 90s, how does that make you feel? Are your parents supportive? Were they supportive? Were your friends? Like, how do they perceive this identity of yours at that time?
Well, I mean, I wasn't. It's not that I was the only vegan that I knew. I knew other vegans, but not where I was living. So back in the day in Spain, maybe there were a handful of vegan. I don't know how many. Maybe there were 20 or 30 vegans at that time. I don't know. Maybe there were a bit more. But I could maybe know at the time maybe like 5 or 6 vegans, maybe in other places. I live in this place. It's called Galicia, and there I didn't know anyone. And in my hometown, I didn't know anyone, and I still don't know anyone who was vegan at the time, really. So yeah, no one was supportive, really. I mean, only this very small group of people that I maybe met once or twice per year or something like that.
But how does that make you feel? You were not bothered by it.
No, not really. I was just thinking of the animals.
That's great. Well, as vegans, we do tend to feel quite isolated. But anyway, it's very good. It's always good to hear where the story starts. Now, I should mention that you and Jojo actually spent a very intense week, maybe more than a week, in China, together in Shandong University and also later in Beijing. Diving into lectures, making arguments for animals, meeting other animal advocates, and enjoy lots of Chinese food. So basically living the academic rock and roll lifestyle. So it only makes sense to bring her in here. Jojo, I know you've got a few questions you've wanted to ask.
So maybe we can start with a very easy question, and we can let this conversation begin with it. So during your trip to China, maybe for the whole China trip, was there a moment or were there a few moments from your China trip that really stayed with you? Even now, even in the future, were they such a moment that will last in your memories?
Well, yeah. I mean, you may think, oh, maybe when I was like eating nice food or visiting nice places, but it was, I mean, of course, I'll remember those things. But the most important thing is, of course, interaction with activists. So that was the best. I mean, meeting you actually, and meeting other great people there. That was the best. That's what I'm not going to forget. Yeah, I guess that's it, really.
So, a question that related to it is that during the trip, what stood out to you about the way animal issues are discussed or approached there? Maybe within the discussion with those animal advocates, and also within the discussion with other maybe people that do not know a lot about the animal issues. So how do you feel about those conversations and discussions?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. First of all, there are things that animal advocates say everywhere. Like, oh, yeah, maybe in other places things are like this and that, but here filled with whatever fits the country, things are different because of this and this and this. So people everywhere, if you go to China, but then if you go to, I don't know, say Mexico, or if you go to, I don't know, Portugal, people will say exactly the same thing and then say, oh, but here in Portugal or here in China, things are like this. And they're telling you exactly the same thing, right? That happens so often. Oh, but people here, they have this tradition, and in China, like if this was specific of China, and this doesn't happen everywhere, and it happens, all around the world. So that's one thing. So in one respect, many of the things that people were saying were really things that you are used to hearing if you travel around the world. Then as for particular debates and things that activists or advocates talk about, in some respects, you could see the commonalities with other places. In some other respects, you could see that there is more isolation in China than there are in other places. Oh, there is in other places. So, like for instance, debates about animals and the future, animals in the long term, debates about invertebrate exploitation, debates about wild animals, AI and animals, for instance. So most activists around the world are not familiar with these issues, but anyway, a growing number of advocates are, and I've known some people from China who are very well aware of these topics, but in my interactions with many activists, I could see that to a large extent, those very frontier topics in animal advocacy were not really that discussed, and that's a pity. And so I guess that maybe in other places, activists are better connected with what other people from other places around the world are doing than what happens in China. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question. So when it comes to frontier discussions, could you elaborate a little bit more? Like, aside from, say, for example, AI and animal ethics, what are the other issues that you think that people should pay more attention to? Could you give us a few examples, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think those examples really are the most representative of the things that weren't discussed maybe 15 years ago and are discussed now. And AI may be like the hottest one, maybe the one that is receiving growing attention now, and that more and more people are becoming aware that it's going to be dramatically changing the game for animals as for, everything else really. And especially with timelines for transformative AI coming up, becoming shorter and shorter, an increasing number of animal advocates are taking this very seriously, because this can mean that many more animals will be exploited, and that they may be exploited in worse ways. And also with wild animals, it presents some challenges and opportunities. And also there is the thing of what happens then when AI systems may have the capacity to maybe locking attitudes or ways of, behaving toward animals in general. So maybe right now there is still a window of opportunity to try to make it the case that AI doesn't inherit, so to speak, the species' institutionalized attitudes that we found today. So yeah, I mean, this would be maybe the clearest example. But as I mentioned before, there are other concerns for animals on the long term, right? On new trends in animal exploitation, in the creation of new animals using, for instance, synthetic biology, gene-drive techniques. Also, when it comes to wild animal suffering, things like, for instance, exporting animals out of Earth, right? Like bringing animals to space. I mean, this is something that most animal advocates are unaware of, but there have been animals in space already for experimentation, and there are already discussions and research on expanding animal farming to space as well. So different space agencies around the world are researching this, and maybe we can stop it now, but it will be hard to stop it in the future. So this, to someone who has never heard about this, all these things may sound like crazy, like totally crazy ideas. But as I say, that's probably because you are unfamiliar with them. So these are examples of things that are being discussed like at the frontier, Then there are other, of course, discussions having to do with strategies But it's not that those discussions are around is it good to, to push for welfare reforms or not? Maybe the discussion should be more nuanced about what is more cost effective here and there. Well, yeah, so I guess that this can be like quick overview. Maybe I'm leaving something behind, but this could be something that comes to my mind when you ask that question.
So maybe my next question is about your feeling or overall impression of the animal ethics and advocacy in China. So during your trip to China, what's your overall impression of maybe the whole situation in China, about the situation that animals are facing and also the animal advocacies?
Yeah, so as for animal advocates, I mean, I met not a whole bunch of them, but I still met, a few of them actually in different places. And my impression of them is great. I really like animal advocates in China. I mean, they are extremely, the people I knew at least, they were extremely committed people who really took it very seriously, who wanted to do work in a way that is pro, but who at the same time really see it as part of their life. So it's not that they want to just like have a job in animal advocacy, not at all. It's that they live it and they want to make a difference with all they have. And the only problem is that, there are not so many animal advocates in China, especially when you consider the whole population, right? Yeah. But you can see that. I mean, that's no news from my end. I mean, both things really may be connected actually, and I can speak here considering what I've seen in other places, like where I'm from. So if you compare like the average advocate 20 years ago with the average advocate right now, 20 years ago they were much more committed because only committed people were into this, right? So as the movement grows, you start to get more and more people, and you reach, wider sociological spectrum, so to speak. And then you start to get an average lower level of commitment, right? Reasonably enough, And also you start to have people who, like, for instance, when they start to work on this in a pro way, in a professionalized way, they see it as a job. So, it's not that they live it and that they give their lives for this, right? So that doesn't happen yet in China. And that is great. Although it is better if you grow and you still maintain this core group of people who are really committed, but you manage to attract other people as well.
So maybe one more practical question is that if you had to pick a few areas for advocates in China to focus on, whether in public education or maybe policy, what would they be and how you suggest them to approach it?
Yeah, so I think that how you approach these questions really varies a lot from one place to another. And maybe, for instance, one type of questions would be whether to focus more on education, changing attitudes, or on trying to attain like changes in policies and, changes in how people who are the decision makers can take animals into consideration. I think that if the latter were attained in China, that would be great, even if the change wasn't like very significant in the short term. So if, for instance, the government in China just expressed that animal welfare is a concern, even if what they actually did in practice in order to actually enforce this wasn't very significant, just that statement would be a huge step. And to connect it, for instance, to what we were talking about before, about, for instance, AI, that would also reflect in, for instance, AI policy as well. That would be a consideration to take into account, and that could make it like a huge change. So attaining one change of the kind, even if it were symbolic, I think that would be extremely important, right? Then, as for goals in public education, I think something that is interesting is that if you consider how things are going in different places, you can look at what is the model that you would prefer and try to avoid mistakes. So, for instance, if you compare how things are done in the English-speaking world and, for instance, in the French-speaking world or the Spanish-speaking world, what you'll see is that the concept of speciesism is very present in the Spanish-speaking world and extremely present in the French-speaking world, and is almost absent in the English-speaking world. Whereas in the English-speaking world, they put much more emphasis on things like factory farming and behavioral change, like veganism, stuff like that, or just reducing the consumption of animals, whatever. I really think that this is worse overall, and that in a context like China, advocating for things like the moral consideration of animals and the rejection of speciesism would be much better, connecting it, with China's philosophical traditions and so on. So you don't need to impose behavioral changes on people or make them think that you are trying to impose them. Because you are never imposing, of course, anything if you are advocating for something, But people get that impression in a stupid way, but that happens. So I would put more stress there. I would also incorporate from the beginning ideas like, for instance, concern for all sentient beings, including very simple minds like invertebrates. And you may think, oh, yeah, but people don't like bugs. When people think of cockroaches, they feel disgust. Well, then you don't put the example of a cockroach. Maybe you put the example of, I don't know, a butterfly or a bee or a dragonfly, that people feel more sympathy for. And then the idea of caring for wild animals as sentient individuals, you can just incorporate it from the very beginning. You don't need to do like in other countries where, they didn't advocate for that until much later. So you can, so to speak, get the shortcuts and not incur in, problems that advocacy in some other places have. And yeah, you can also have this long-term approach, meaning that at the end of the day, if you attain certain attitude changes, even if they are not the ones that you would like to see, because you would like to see them deeper, and even if they don't come by the hand of behavioral changes that would be desirable, in the long term, that can be much better. I'm going to put just an example of this that I sometimes use, and I think that illuminates this in a way that it makes it clear to understand. So suppose that you could make it the case that 10 people don't eat animals or animal products ever again, for reasons that don't have to do at all with concern for animals, but maybe, I don't know, for whatever other reason they think it's healthier or whatever. And suppose that you can also make it the case that other 10 people question speciesism, they challenge their own speciesist attitudes, even though they would continue to eat animal products, but knowing that they're doing something that is morally questionable, maybe they lack the willpower to do so, but they nevertheless are convinced that they shouldn't be doing so and that speciesism is wrong. If the world were to end like 2 months from now, you should prefer the former. But since that's not going to happen, I think you should prefer the latter, because eventually the only change that you are going to attain with the first course of action is that those people won't eat those animals. But then with the other people, the change you're going to attain is going to be much more significant, because these people are going to be speaking with others, and they may change the minds of others who eventually may end up not eating animals. So in the second case, you are starting a movement. It's like a snowball. You are putting something in traction, whereas in the former, it's just a dead end, right? So I think these are things that have not been considered in other places, and maybe they should be taken into account in China.
Understand. So do you have any other comments about your China trip, or do you have any other words that you want to say to Chinese advocates or Chinese audience of us, or something like what you look forward in your next China trip? Like, what do you expect to change in maybe 2 years, 3 years time? So yeah, because Jin has other questions that don't relate that much to your China trip, so I want to give you this freedom of say whatever you want about this China trip?
Well, that China trip, even though it was like a half a month, I got the impression that it was very short. So next time I'll try to go to more places and speak with other people and learn from other people. So in my previous in some previous comments, I mentioned the state of animal advocacy, not really the state of animal ethics. I just put it all together. But if what you mean by animal ethics as a discipline, and you consider like a work like that is more intellectual or academic, and I'm connecting this with your question about maturity, because in my trip I was like giving talks in universities. I think that the work that some pioneers there, like especially Professor Guo Feng, has done is amazing. And I think it would be great if people could push a bit more for that. There is, I think there are very interesting possibilities there. Maybe also collaborating with scholars from Hong Kong, trying to make stronger the connection with also scholars from other countries, and also with other people who are not scholars, who are advocates. I think it would be great if there could be more collaboration and communication. So let me just be clear. It's not that people from outside are going to like speak with Chinese people and tell them what they should do. That's not what this is about. I'm talking about just communication and exchange of ideas. In addition to this, for sure, there are a bunch of things that could be taken into account. We don't have the time for that really to get in detail with that. Maybe, we would require a different format for that. Maybe do some other, course or session like the one we had in Jinan. But I think that these key ideas, trying to incorporate more frontier thinking, trying to take into account ideas also from other people, pay lots of attention to things like AI, right? Especially being, China, one of the leading countries in this respect. Even if that's the only thing that happens, that would be super useful. And I guess that to conclude, I'll say just one thing, which is that there is this mindset that most people have, most animal advocates have around the world, and Chinese activists have it as well. And it can be useful for them to get rid of it, which is we tend to be reactive instead of proactive. We tend to think of what is good, how can we have a good impact, instead of how can we have the best impact, right? So often when we see things that are bad for animals that we can change, we figure out campaigns we can run, we say, okay, let's do it. That's a mistake. That's a very big mistake. You shouldn't be doing campaigns about things that are worth it, that you have in front of your eyes, that you can change. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be identifying where you can have the biggest impact, where you can change more things for more animals, and you should focus there, right? Meaning that maybe the campaign you think at the beginning, you should not work on. You should work on something else instead, right? And try to work on China, in general, not just at a local level, can be an example of this. But yeah, we don't have time to go into detail, but I think that would be a good recommendation.
Yeah, thanks, Oscar, and thanks, Jojo. These are great questions and also answers and proposals. I guess I'll start to work on my big red button, because I think that is the most, that's going to be the most impactful strategies to eliminate animal suffering. But joke aside, I want to pick up the thread from a different angle. So looking at how animal ethics, speciesism, and these kinds of ideas, how are they going to play out in practice? So often when we talk about animal ethics, I think the hardest part is always in practice, right? For example, like when human interests and animals' interests are in conflict. And in cases like wild animal conflicts, like human-wildlife conflicts, protecting individual animals sometimes clashes with supporting human livelihood, especially in farming communities or indigenous contexts. Of course, I'm not trying to ask you for a solution. It's always very context dependent. It's very complicated. But how do you usually think about making these trade-offs?
Well, I mean, this kind of connects with what I mentioned before, which is you need to think, suppose that you are considering one case of the sort, right? Meaning that maybe you could run a campaign there. But is that campaign going to be the one that is going to have a more significant impact for animals? Probably not. If it's a conflict with some indigenous group or something, then that probably means that the number of animals involved is very small. So you shouldn't be working on that. You should be working on something else. So that would be like the most important thing. Now, this being said, if you ask me at a more theoretical level or at a more moral level, we shouldn't discriminate against non-human animals. Speciesism is wrong, meaning that suppose that there is some conflict between two groups of humans and one group of humans is harming the other, but doing so is something that they've been doing for a long time. And maybe is something that is very important for the economy of the ones who are harming the others. If we nevertheless, in that case, would defend the ones that are being harmed, then we need to hold the same view when the individuals that are being affected are animals, right? Because we shouldn't be speciesists. This is very clear. But again, let me just stress that probably these are not going to be the examples of very significantly effective campaigns.
But I feel like there's a contradiction there. So previously, when you were saying about advocating for, helping people to overcome speciesism, and you mentioned that maybe appeal to sympathy, right? Using butterflies or animals that are more charismatic can help with people's changing their biases and discrimination against unattractive, like not very charismatic species. But when it comes to conflicts like this, I think it's people's inclination and it's also their sympathy to feel like, okay, I want to work on this issue because this is very urgent, and this is also, concerning, say, for example, elephants or other animals that are just people think that are they can relate to. And also just not everyone is utilitarian, right? Not everyone kind of apply this framework when it comes to decision making. So how would you reply to this? How would you respond to this situation then? The people are drawn to work on these issues.
Okay, so first thing, I guess that when you say not everyone is utilitarian, it's because you are identifying utilitarianism with this idea that we should try to have the best impact, but this doesn't need to be the case, really. So utilitarianism is just one theory, one ethical theory, according to which when it comes to deciding how to act, we should add all the positive things that individuals can have, typically their experiences or maybe their satisfied preferences, and all the negative things they can have, the frustrated preferences or the suffering. And then considering all that, we estimate what's going to happen if we do A or if we do B, and we compare it and we do what's going to be better. Okay, yeah. So if we accept this, we want to have the best impact. But suppose we have a different view. For instance, I am an egalitarian. My focus is on, I want there to be the lesser suffering possible, but I also want to avoid that some individuals are in a very, very bad situation, right? So I wouldn't agree with utilitarianism because utilitarianism may imply that in a certain scenario, maybe the best solution implies that some individuals are in a very bad position. And I wouldn't want that because I want to protect the worst off. I still want to have the best impact. I want the best impact for everyone, especially the worst off. Suppose that I defend a virtue ethics approach. I want individuals to act as virtuously as possible. It's not that I want that only me or only a few individuals act virtually. I want everyone to act virtuously. And also acting virtuously means that you want there to happen what is best, not what is worse. If you have a choice and you want the scenario that is worse, probably that is not really virtuous. Or if you are like a care ethicist, like if you suppose you accept a feminist care ethic, then you would place special importance in paying attention to those individuals who are in need of aid, right? And then again, you will want to help them as much as you can, right? So it looks like you are not really caring for them if you are preferring some options that is suboptimal, and so on. We could go with other theories, with the ontological theories and so on. So trying to have the best impact is nothing that commits you with a certain ethical viewpoint. I think, I mean, of course, there are ethical viewpoints that don't commit you with that, but then I think that they can be challenged on different grounds. Anyway, let's then come back to your main point. So, okay, now you are like kind of fleshing out a bit more the kind of example you have in mind, because in your original formulation of the question, you didn't mention, oh, suppose that you can run a campaign that people love, that people want to work on really a lot, and it just so happens that you just mentioned, suppose that there is this conflict, and then I told you what I thought of that. But then you are coming up with a more nuanced description in which it also happens that people are very sympathetic towards doing that. Okay, fair enough. The fact that people are very sympathetic about that means that maybe you can get a lot of support for that very easily, meaning that with fewer resources, you can have a higher impact here than in another campaign. Okay, this is definitely something to take into account. Now, it's not the only thing to take into account, because it may well be the case that you can run a campaign that people feel a lot of sympathy toward. So it's very easy then to leverage your impact there. But it's still maybe the number of individuals that are affected for that, or maybe the kind of harm that is at stake, is not really that important. Whereas there is another campaign that people support much less, but that campaign can have a huge impact on many animals. Then you should run the second campaign instead of the former, right? But then suppose that there is a campaign that can have a huge impact and people are sympathetic toward, but then if you run this campaign, there are going to be humans that are going to have their interests affected. If those interests are not as important as those of animals, and for sure they won't be, given that this campaign is meant to be very effective, then the interests of animals should prevail. However, it's often very strategic to take into account the interests of humans as well. So you make the campaign more likely to be accepted. So maybe you can like provide ways in which if the interests of human beings are going to be affected because you are protecting these animals, maybe there is a way in which you can do it that makes it like not so bad for the human beings to be affected, you know? So these are things that you need to take into account. Though at the end of the day, really, we shouldn't be speciesists, right? So we shouldn't say, oh yeah, but these humans are affected, so you can run this campaign. Why is that? Well, because of course you can't do something that is worse for humans. Well, not at all. I mean, we shouldn't be speciesists and just accept that, oh, we can do something that is going to be worse for humans, but it's totally okay to allow things to happen that are terribly bad and much worse for non-human animals. That wouldn't be acceptable, I think.
So relate to that, I think the current governance, especially environmental governance, where most animals are being managed under, is often protecting habitats. Their focus is often about protecting habitats or ecosystems rather than the welfare of individual animals. And from a policy perspective, I think many people might argue that habitat protection can seem more practical. And it might also, provide more protection for all kinds of animals, all different kinds of species, etc., even though individual welfare is not the center of the concern. And it can sometimes overlook the suffering of individual animals. So how do you see the right balance between these two, habitat protection and individual animals' welfare?
Yeah, so there is this common misconception according to which when we are thinking of wild animals, what we are looking at is groups. So instead of seeing animals as sentient individuals, they are just seen as members of species or as parts of ecosystems. And this is wrong, because ecosystems or species can't suffer. It's individuals that suffer. So that's an important confusion to be clarified. By defending one thing, we're not necessarily defending the other, because they're two different things. But then, of course, you can think, well, maybe even if they're different things, one One is about groups, another one is about individuals, and we only should care about individuals. It just so happens that when you protect species or ecosystems, you are protecting individuals as well, because individuals are members of those groups of ecosystems. And when you are protecting the habitats, the places where they live, you are protecting them. So this is an assumption that is actually wrong. So if your focus is on protecting species, you may want to do things like, for instance, breeding animals in captivity, which is very, very bad for the animals, right? Or, for instance, all the things that have been done is relocating animals. So, for instance, with restoring certain ecosystems by capturing animals from certain areas and releasing them into others. And this may be very bad for those animals, right? Because they are kidnapped, so to speak. They are separated from their families, brought to somewhere. These whereabouts, they don't know. They suffer a lot. For instance, this has happened with wolves, and it has been extremely harmful for the wolves. And it's also obviously been harmful for the animals that wolves kill, who used to have better lives. And now it's not just that they're killed, it's also that, they need to be careful not to be harmed. And as a result of this, in areas where there are predators, animals have their nutrition is way worse because they need to be much more careful when they eat. So typically they lack nutrients that they may have more easily when they can eat safely. Their levels of stress can also skyrocket, so it's worse for animals. And with habitat, it's not totally clear either that habitat conservation is good or bad for animals. And this may come as a surprise for many people. But in some respect, in some cases, it can be good. In some other cases, it can be bad. Why is that? Well, because it's not that the welfare of animals is always great in the wild. Sometimes animals suffer a lot. They can suffer a lot, for instance, due to factors like disease, parasitism, hostile weather conditions, accidents, conflicts, etc., etc. So suppose that animals weren't present in a certain area, and you make it the case that they can expand to that area, which is at the fringe of where they live, right? And suppose that then this area has some environmental conditions that are a bit different because they are at the fringe from the ones that they have where they come from, right? It may be that those environmental conditions, well, it may be no, it is the case that they typically vary from one year to another. I mean, their environmental conditions are not always stable. The temperature changes, the weather is not the same from one year to another. The level also of humidity, light, salinity of the environment, for instance, if we think of aquatic animals, may vary also. And as a result of these, animals who live in the fringe of their, range where they are, typically suffer a lot. They may just completely disappear from one year to another, right? So it's not that expanding then the habitat there is going to be helpful for animals. It's going to just probably make it the case that the proportion of suffering for many animals is going to be unbearable. So you're going to be increasing the suffering of animals overall, but also you're going to be increasing the number of animals who have lives that contain more suffering than pleasure, the number of animals who have terrible lives. And these are many animals. You need to take into account that most animals reproduce by, laying very, very large numbers of offspring, like eggs. And like some animals may lay like thousands of eggs or millions of eggs. And of course, we don't see animals, populations like multiplying, like, exponentially. Sometimes they do, but typically, if you have like stable populations of animals, what happens is that only one per parent on average will survive and make it to maturity. The rest of them die shortly after coming into existence in their juvenile states. And as a result of this, they may endure the suffering of the death, but they don't have time to, enjoy positive experiences in the process leading to their death. So that's why you should be very, very careful in assuming that what may be better for conservation is going to be better for the well-being of animals. Sometimes it is, but in many cases, it's not.
So we have just been talking about the tension between focusing on habitats and focusing on individuals. And that also connects to a bigger debate in political philosophy, political theory, for example, zoopolis, which has been recently translated and published in China, and argues that animals can be seen as part of our political communities with rights of citizenship or sovereignty, for example, and should be included in our decision-making processes as political agents. And your work has been more cautious about this, as far as I know, in one of the earlier papers, especially with regards to wild animals, where you argue against the sovereignty conceptualization of Will Klimika's model, and you emphasize we still have obligations to intervene. So how do you see the limits of zoopolis approach, and what's different about your perspective?
Yeah, so to start with, I'm not very happy with the nation-state approach, even when it comes to human beings, because I think that all human beings should count the same. I don't think I have the slightest reason to care more for someone who lives a kilometer from where I am than to care more for someone who lives in China. It's not that I shouldn't care so much more, as many people do, for others who live close to them. No, I don't think I should care an inch, a centimeter, a millimeter more for, someone who lives, 100 meters from here than I should from anyone living all around the world in any place. And this applies for human beings. And so as a result of that, I'm not happy with that model applying for non-human animals as well. So I think that sentience is all that matters, and we should care for all sentient beings. And we shouldn't be raising these barriers between sentient beings. And these barriers, which I think shouldn't apply in the case of human beings, I think it's very problematic to raise them in the case of other sentient beings, and especially to think that in their case, things are going to work like we've been assuming that they work, at least in post-Westphalian scenarios, in the case of, human nations. In addition to this, there are many non-human animals who do form political communities. I don't know, maybe elephants, though I don't think that they are like nations among humans. They are different. But then there are many non-human animals who don't form nations, and they deserve the same respect. And again, the concept of political community probably is not going to be the best one to address what happens in their case. In addition to this, I guess this distinction between domesticated animals and wild animals that don't live close to human beings, and wild animals like liminal animals, as they are called, these synanthropic animals who live closer to human beings, is not one that I would consider relevant, because I think that our obligations towards them all shouldn't vary with respect to how strong they should be. I think they should be equally strong. Even though, their interests and what we need to do to help them may be different, but I think we should be not harming anyone, and we should be helping them all, not just helping those that are domesticated or those that live close to us.
Well, thank you. I am not going to engage in a very extensive debate about defending their framework, but I do see where you're coming from. So before we wrap up, I want to bring in something you have written about also a few years ago, maybe. We have touched on this in a past episode, the idea of second-order discrimination. I don't know if you still remember. So basically the idea that vegans are being discriminated for standing up against the discrimination of animals, standing up against speciesism. So it's not just the suffering of animals that weighs on many vegans, but also the misunderstanding or even the hostility we sometimes face from the wider society. It can take a real toll on our mental health. So as someone who has been engaging this movement for a really long time, do you have any advice or strategies you use yourself, ways to stay resilient, keep perspective, cope with stress, and especially given how daunting the future for animals can feel?
To be honest, I don't. I don't find it that difficult. I just don't harm animals, and I'm used to not harming animals. I don't find it any difficult at all. I would find very difficult to harm animals, actually. So it's like a second skin to me, and I don't really think that much about that. It's true that sometimes people can be nasty, and sometimes people can be discouraging. So, for instance, this is something that many people have asked me, which is, oh yeah, I have this friend or I have this relative and so on, and I've been trying to explain to them everything. I've told them everything they do to animals. I've even showed them a video. I explained all the arguments and they won't change. What can I do to make them change? And the answer is nothing. They're not going to change if they haven't already. What you should do is stop insisting, stop caring. Try to convince someone else. That would be a way better use of your time, and it won't make you that unhappy, right? And that's what I do. Like, for instance, I have relatives. I have relatives who went vegan, and I have relatives who didn't go vegan, and they are not going to go vegan. So yeah, I don't spend my time trying to change them. I spend my time trying to change all the people around. And something else is that the way in which we deal with people who are nasty may be different depending on how our character is, but you shouldn't be like standing bad people. So whenever someone is nasty with you, whenever someone makes a joke, if you don't need to stand them, don't stand them. It's like, yeah, okay, well, whatever. Don't care about those people, okay? You don't have the obligation to care for people who are hurting you in this way and who are hurting animals, right? You sometimes may choose to be patient in certain contexts when there are other people, around and you are doing advocacy, and maybe in that moment making the other people look like they are idiots and your argument is reasonable, that requires some patience. Yeah, let's do it. For the rest, this feeling that you are alone, that there are no other people around you who share your ideas. Well, I can see how for some people that's hard. But then I suggest that you think of all the other people who really are activists, who really are thinking just like you, who are many people who are out there all around the world, and in China or wherever people are listening to this. So you can get connected with those people, and maybe that can help as well. And even when you are not directly speaking with them, just the awareness that you are part of something bigger, that can be very helpful as well. But yeah, I mean, I'm sorry that I can't anyway come up with like great suggestions for this. I guess I'm better at speaking out all the things that I know more of. There are other people who are much more knowledgeable about this than I am, And yeah, I guess that the only thing I can say is that for people who find it hard when they start with veganism, it will become easier and easier and easier. And at some point, you just don't care. It's great. As you age, it's like, yeah, it's way easier, and it doesn't affect you that much. Really.
Right. I've seen it all, basically. On that positive note, I guess it's a good timing for us to end our conversation. But before we end, is there anything, Oscar, you would like to plug? Maybe if you have any final remark or places that you can tell us listeners where they can follow your work and learn more about your projects, what you're doing.
Yeah, so I guess I would suggest, rather than following me, they can take a look at Animal Ethics website, which is available in a bunch of languages, and they can read it in Chinese. And well, I mean, currently with translators, it's very easy. They could just read it in just translating the contents in English. But yeah, there is a bunch of material there. And again, I would encourage people to get more informed about wild animal suffering. They can just make some internet search for this. This book is not being translated into Chinese, but it's available in English. It's called Introduction to Wild Animal Suffering. Then AI is important. They can also look for information about this. One site they can look at is that of Sentient Futures, who work on this. They can also look at the work of Fai, Fai, who is this great researcher from Hong Kong. I mean, awesome work leading. Yeah, I mean, he's leading the way. Actually, he is the leading person all around the world in this regard. And you can read what he has been coming up with. You can also get informed with, more about invertebrate farming, which is very, very problematic. There is a possibility that in the future, animal farming will be something of the past because, alternative proteins will, eventually prevail. But invertebrate proteins are a big threat to this. We should be very wary of this. And then finally, something that I would strongly recommend to all our listeners is to continue to listen to this podcast and to be in touch with the amazing work, really, really amazing work that Jojo, Han Joslin, and I'm probably pronouncing your names very bad, do, because these are amazing people who are pioneering work on this. I can't stress, sufficiently how much I admire their work and also how much I admire the work of all other, pioneers in China. I mean, I mentioned already a few people like Fai, like Professor Guo, but there are many others. Many of them, I've met them in this trip. And I would just say this, keep on the great work, don't give up. And let's make the world a better place.
Thank you, Oscar. Thank you so much for giving a shout out to our podcast and also our friends. And thank you again for joining us on Slightly Tofu. And we really appreciate your generosity with your time and the chance to talk through so many important issues.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you for your time.